The emergency beacon screamed across the void like a dying animal's last cry. Marcus Chen's salvage ship, the Broken Promise, drifted through the asteroid field toward the source of the distress signal, its aging sensors painting a grim picture on his navigation display. Debris scattered across several thousand kilometers told the story of a violent end-twisted metal, frozen atmosphere crystals, and the unmistakable radiation signature of a breached fusion core. Marcus ran a weathered hand through his graying hair and studied the wreckage field. 23 years of military service had taught him to read destruction like other people read books, and this particular story was written in a language of desperation and terror. The ship had been running hard when it died, engines pushed past their safety limits, life support systems overcharged. Someone had been fleeing something terrible. Prometheus, run a full-spectrum analysis on that debris, he said to his ship's AI. I want to know what kind of vessel we're looking at and who might have been aboard. The synthetic voice that responded carried none of the warmth of human speech, but Marcus had grown comfortable with its clinical precision over the years. Analysis complete, Marcus. The wreckage appears to be from a Zephyrian transport vessel. Classification unknown. However, I am detecting unusual energy signatures consistent with biocontainment systems. I am also reading multiple life signs. Marcus straightened in his pilot's chair. Life signs meant survivors, and survivors meant complications. In this part of space, 3 days beyond the nearest human outpost, complications usually came with teeth and hostile intentions. Still, the salvage rights on his Zephyrian transport could set him up for a comfortable retirement, and his conscience wouldn't let him ignore potential survivors. How many life signs are we talking about? He asked, already beginning to plot an approach vector. 17 distinct biosignatures. However, Marcus, I should note that 16 of them appear to be in stasis pods, and their readings are unusual. The 17th signature is much weaker and appears to be in distress. The Broken Promise moved through the debris field with practiced ease, her pilot navigating around twisted hull plates and floating cargo containers with the skill of someone who had spent decades in the void. Marcus activated his ship's external cameras, sweeping them across the largest intact section of the transport. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The transport hadn't just been destroyed. It had been systematically torn apart. Weapon signatures scarred the hull in patterns Marcus recognized from his military days. These weren't random pirate attacks or asteroid impacts. Someone had hunted this ship down and executed everyone aboard with the cold efficiency of a professional extermination squad. Prometheus? Those weapon signatures, Marcus said quietly. Run them against military databases. I want to know what we're dealing with. There was a pause longer than usual before the AI responded. Marcus, I am detecting Imperial hegemony weapon signatures, specifically those consistent with Vorthan hunter-killer squadrons. The blood in Marcus's veins turned to ice water. The Vorthan were the hegemony's premier enforcement arm, bioengineered warriors bred for one purpose: eliminating threats to Imperial dominance. If they had destroyed this transport, it meant someone aboard had been carrying something the Empire wanted dead more than they wanted it captured. Marcus should have turned around, should have activated his beacon and reported the wreckage to the nearest Imperial outpost, should have followed the 100 regulations and protocols that govern salvage operations in contested space. Instead, he found himself thinking about 17 life signs in the dark, and one of them growing weaker by the minute. Take us in closer, he ordered, and prep the medical bay. If someone's alive in there, they're not going to stay that way much longer. The docking process was delicate work. The transport's hull had been breached in dozens of places, and atmosphere leaked from the wounds like blood from a dying animal. Marcus suited up in his environmental gear and crossed through the airlock into a scene from his nightmares. Bodies floated in the corridors, frozen in the positions they had died in. Zephyrians, their elegant crystalline features now clouded with death, but these weren't civilian casualties. As Marcus moved deeper into the ship, he realized these Zephyrians had died fighting. Weapon burns scored the walls, and several bodies clutched military-grade plasma rifles. Someone had made their last stand here, protecting something precious enough to die for. The biocontainment area lay at the ship's heart, behind layers of security doors that had been systematically breached by Imperial weapons. Marcus's suit lights cut through the darkness, revealing a chamber lined with stasis pods. 16 of them hummed with power, their occupants suspended in chemical sleep. But it was the 17th pod that drew his attention. The stasis chamber had been damaged in the attack, its systems failing. Inside, a figure thrashed weakly against the restraints, suffocating as the life support systems died around her. Marcus moved without thinking, his fingers flying over the pod's manual release controls. The chamber hissed open, spilling preservation fluid across the deck. The creature that fell into his arms was unlike anything in his experience. She appeared young, perhaps equivalent to a human teenager, but her features defied easy classification. Her skin held an opalescent quality that shifted between pale blue and silver in his suit lights. Her hair was white as starlight, and when her eyes fluttered open, they were the deep violet of hyperspace. But it was her expression that stopped his breath, raw terror mixed with a desperate hope that someone, anyone, might show her kindness. She spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, words in a language his translator couldn't identify. But fear was universal, and Marcus recognized it in every line of her trembling body. "Easy," he said softly, though she couldn't understand him. "You're safe now. I've got you." He lifted her carefully, noting how light she seemed despite appearing human-sized. Her bones felt hollow, like a bird's, and her skin was cold to the touch. Whatever species she belonged to, she was dying. The stasis pod's failure had poisoned her system, and without immediate medical attention, she would be dead within hours. As Marcus carried her toward his ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. The Zephyrians had died protecting these pods, but why? What was so important about 17 sleeping figures that the Empire would send hunter-killer squadrons to eliminate them? The answer came as he passed one of the intact stasis pods. His suit lights illuminated the sleeping figure inside, and Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. The occupant looked exactly like the girl in his arms, not similar, identical. Every feature, every curve of bone, every strand of white hair was perfectly replicated. He moved to the next pod. The same face stared back at him. And the next? And the next. 16 identical figures slept in the pods, each one a perfect copy of the girl he carried. But while they slumbered in peaceful suspension, she had been awake, aware, and slowly dying in her failing chamber. "What the hell were they doing to you?" Marcus whispered. Back aboard the Broken Promise, Marcus worked frantically to save her life. His medical bay wasn't equipped for xenobiology, but basic principles of medicine crossed species lines. Oxygen, warmth, and fluids to flush the toxins from her system. As her condition stabilized, Marcus found himself studying her features in the harsh light of the medical scanners. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way that made his chest tight. But more than that, there was an intelligence in her violet eyes that seemed far older than her apparent age. When she looked at him, Marcus had the unsettling feeling that she was seeing more than just his face, that somehow she was looking into his soul. "Prometheus," he said as he finished adjusting her IV drip. "What's our status on the other pods?" "The remaining stasis chambers are undamaged and operating within normal parameters. However, Marcus, I should inform you that I have been attempting to decode the transport's databanks. The little information I have recovered suggests these individuals were part of something called the Synthesis Project." "What kind of project?" "The data is fragmented, but references suggest it was a hegemony research initiative focused on creating specialized soldiers." The notation Theta series appears frequently in connection with these particular subjects. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. The Empire's military research programs were legendary for their brutality. If this girl was the product of hegemony experimentation, then saving her had just made him an enemy of the most powerful force in the galaxy. As if sensing his thoughts, the girl's eyes opened. She looked around the medical bay with evident confusion before her gaze settled on Marcus. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the species divide. Then, slowly, she raised one delicate hand towards his face. Marcus didn't pull away as her fingers traced the lines around his eyes, the scars from old battles, the marks that 23 years of hard living had left on his features. Her touch was gentle, curious, and completely without fear. Whatever she had suffered at the hands of her creators, she seemed to recognize that Marcus meant her no harm. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, and this time his translator caught fragments of meaning. Old Galactic Standard, heavily accented but recognizable. "You saved me," she said haltingly. "Why?" The question hit Marcus harder than any weapon ever had. In a universe where might made right and compassion was weakness, she genuinely couldn't understand why someone would help her without expecting something in return. What kind of life had she known that basic kindness was incomprehensible? "Because you needed help," Marcus said simply. "And because no one should die alone in the dark." She blinked at him, violet eyes wide with wonder, as if he had just revealed some fundamental truth about the universe. Then, to his amazement, Tears began to flow down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of relief so profound it shook her entire body.
"My name is Marcus," he said gently.
"What's yours?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of infinite loneliness. "I do not have a name," she said. "I am Theta. 1-7, the last of the synthesis project. The failure." The word failure hit Marcus like a physical blow. Someone had looked at this beautiful, intelligent creature and deemed her inadequate. Someone had condemned her to watch her identical sisters sleep while she slowly died, discarded like broken equipment. "Well, Theta." 1-7, Marcus said firmly. "From now on, you're not a number. You're not a project. You're just you. And if you want a name, we'll find you one that fits." For the first time since he'd found her, something that might have been a smile touched her lips. It was tentative, fragile, but it transformed her entire face. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct stronger than anything he'd ever experienced. Outside the medical bay, proximity alarms began to sound. Marcus checked his displays and cursed under his breath. 3 Imperial ships were approaching fast, their weapons hot and targeting systems active. Someone had been monitoring the wreckage, waiting to see who might respond to the distress beacon. "Marcus," Prometheus announced with unusual urgency, "I am detecting Vorthan biosignatures aboard the approaching vessels. They are hailing us." The girl's eyes went wide with terror at the mention of the Vorthan. She grabbed Marcus's arm with surprising strength, her nails digging into his skin. "They cannot find me," she whispered desperately. "If they find me alive, they will make me watch them kill you. Then they will take me back to the laboratories. Please, if you have any mercy, kill me now." Marcus looked down at her terrified face and made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. He had spent 23 years following orders, serving a system that valued strength above all else. But looking at this frightened girl, who had never known kindness, who expected death as her only escape from suffering, Marcus discovered there were some things more important than following protocol. "No," he said quietly. "No one's killing anyone today. Prometheus, how long until the Imperial ships reach us?" 12 minutes at current velocity." "Then we'd better move fast." Marcus helped the girl sit up, noting how she favored her left side. "Can you walk?" I think so. But Marcus, they have scanning equipment that can detect my biosignature through any shielding. There is nowhere to hide. There is one place," Marcus said grimly, "but you're not going to like it." 10 minutes later, the Broken Promise's cargo hold had been reconfigured into a makeshift hiding place. Marcus had activated every piece of interference equipment he owned, filling the hold with enough electromagnetic noise to blind any scanner. The girl lay hidden inside a shipping container lined with signal-dampening materials, unconscious from the sedative Marcus had been forced to give her. It was the only way to lower her biosigns enough to escape detection. When the Imperial ships docked with the Broken Promise, Marcus was waiting for them with all the casual confidence of a man who had nothing to hide. The Vorthan who boarded his ship were everything the stories claimed. Tall, elegant killers with eyes like chips of ice and movements that spoke of deadly precision. Their leader, a female with intricate scars covering half her face, studied Marcus with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "I am Commander Serix of the Hegemony Enforcement Division," she announced in a voice like crystallized winter. "This vessel responded to an unauthorized distress beacon in Imperial space. Explain your presence here." Marcus gave her his most innocent smile. "Salvage operations, Commander. The beacon indicated a derelict vessel with potential recoverable materials, unlicensed for independent salvage work in this sector." "Show me your logs." Marcus complied, displaying carefully edited records that showed his arrival at the wreckage site and subsequent discovery of total destruction. According to his official logs, the transport had been completely destroyed with no survivors and nothing worth salvaging. Commander Serix studied the data with predatory focus. "Our intelligence indicates this transport was carrying valuable Imperial property. Are you certain you recovered nothing of significance?" "Nothing but scrap metal and frozen bodies," Marcus replied with practiced boredom. "Whoever hit that transport was thorough. Professional work, hunter-killer quality." The commander's eyes narrowed at the implication. Marcus was walking a dangerous line, but he needed to sell the idea that he was just another grubby salvager looking for easy profit. Someone who would immediately report any valuable discoveries to Imperial authorities for the standard finder's fee. We will conduct our own search of your vessel, Serix announced. Standard procedure for operations in contested space. Of course, Marcus agreed, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Though I should warn you, I've got some unstable fuel cells in the cargo hold. Electromagnetic interference from your scanning equipment might cause some issues. It was a calculated risk. The Vorthan were many things, but they weren't stupid. However, they also had a well-documented arrogance that came from being the galaxy's apex predators. The idea that a human salvager might be clever enough to hide something from them would never occur to creatures bred for killing, not thinking. The search took 2 hours. The Vorthan moved through the broken promise like sharks scenting blood, their enhanced sensors probing every corner of the ship. But Marcus had spent 23 years in military intelligence, and he knew how to hide things from people who thought they were smarter than him. When they finally departed, Commander Serix left behind a warning that chilled Marcus to the bone. If you discover any evidence of survivors from that transport, she said, her scarred face inches from his, you will contact Imperial authorities immediately. The subjects aboard that vessel were extremely dangerous. Anyone who aids them will be considered a traitor to the Empire and dealt with accordingly. Of course, Commander, Marcus replied evenly. I'm a loyal citizen of the Empire. If I find anything, you'll be the first to know. After the Imperial ships departed, Marcus waited a full hour before returning to the cargo hold. He found the girl exactly where he'd left her, still unconscious but breathing steadily. As he lifted her from the shipping container, she stirred, violet eyes fluttering open to focus on his face. Did they find me? She whispered. No, Marcus said softly. You're safe. They're gone. She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to understand something beyond her comprehension. You could have given me to them, she said finally. They would have rewarded you. Made you rich. Why didn't you? Marcus carried her back to the medical bay, considering her question. Why hadn't he? The rational answer was that turning her over to the Vorthan would have meant watching her die. And he'd seen enough death for one lifetime. But there was something deeper, something he couldn't quite put into words. Because, he said as he settled her back onto the medical bed, sometimes you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. And I decided I want to be the kind of person who protects people who can't protect themselves. The girl reached out and took his hand in both of hers. Her skin was warm now, no longer the deathly cold it had been when he first found her. In that case, she said with a smile that seemed to light up the entire room, I think I would like a name. Something that means hope or new beginning. Do you know any names like that? Marcus thought for a moment, then smiled back. How about Astra? It's an old Earth name. It means star. Astra, she repeated, testing the sound. Yes. I like that. It sounds like freedom. As the broken promise set course for the outer rim, carrying its unusual passenger toward an uncertain future, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn, from which there would be no going back. He was harboring a fugitive from the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and eventually, they would come looking for her again. But looking at Astra's peaceful face as she slept in the medical bay, Marcus found he didn't care. For the first time in years, he had something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. And if the Empire wanted her, they would have to go through him first. 3 months after rescuing Astra from the wreckage, Marcus had learned that caring for an alien refugee was far more complicated than military intelligence had ever prepared him for. The broken promise had become a floating sanctuary on the galaxy's edge, but sanctuary came with unexpected challenges. The first problem was Astra's rapid development. When Marcus had found her, she'd appeared to be roughly equivalent to a human teenager. But as the weeks passed, it became clear that her species matured differently. Her body was changing, growing stronger and more graceful, while her mind absorbed information at a rate that left Marcus struggling to keep up. She had mastered Galactic Standard within days of waking up, her pronunciation shifting from halting syllables to fluent conversation with an ease that spoke of engineered intelligence. But it wasn't just language. Astra devoured every piece of information Marcus's ship library contained. History, science, literature, military tactics, stellar navigation. She absorbed it all with the hungry desperation of someone who had been starved of knowledge her entire life. The Empire teaches that humans are inferior because they rely on emotion over logic, Astra said one evening as she helped Marcus repair a faulty power coupling. Her delicate fingers moved with surprising strength and precision, handling tools that should have been too heavy for her build. But emotion gives humans something the Empire lacks. What's that? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew her answer. Purpose beyond mere survival, Astra replied, her violet eyes meeting his across the cramped maintenance tunnel. The Vorthen are perfect killers because they feel nothing. The Zephyrians follow orders without question because they fear to do otherwise. Humans fight for things they believe in, even when logic says they should surrender. Marcus smiled grimly. Sometimes, especially when logic says we should surrender. They had developed an easy working relationship over the past weeks. Astra's enhanced physiology made her invaluable for ship maintenance. She could squeeze into spaces too small for Marcus and work in conditions that would have killed an ordinary human. In return, Marcus taught her everything he knew about survival on the galaxy's fringes. But there were moments when Marcus caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something that went beyond gratitude or friendship, something that made his chest tight with feelings he tried not to examine too closely. The second problem was Astra's nightmares. Marcus first became aware of them during their second week together. He'd been awakened by a sound like breaking glass, only to find Astra sitting upright in her bunk, tears streaming down her face as she stared at something only she could see. "They're still in the pods," she whispered when Marcus asked what was wrong. "My sisters, still sleeping while I'm free. Is that fair, Marcus? How can I be happy when they're still trapped?" It was a question Marcus couldn't answer. The 16 stasis pods were still aboard the derelict transport, their occupants suspended in chemical sleep. According to Astra, they were identical copies of her, grown in the same laboratory, trained for the same purpose, sharing the same memories up until the moment she'd been selected for a different fate. "What made you different?" Marcus had asked. "Why were you awake when they weren't?" Astra's expression had turned haunted. "I was the control subject," she explained. "The others were modified, enhanced, perfected. I was left unchanged so the scientists could measure their improvements against my baseline responses. When the project was terminated, my sisters were preserved for future study. I was expendable." The word expendable had hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. In the Empire's eyes, Astra had been nothing more than a living measuring stick, kept alive only long enough to prove her engineered sisters were superior. The casual cruelty of it made him want to hunt down every scientist involved in the project and show them exactly what humans did to people who hurt children. The nightmares always followed the same pattern. Astra would relive her time in the laboratories, subjected to tests that were equal parts scientific procedure and systematic torture. She would watch her sisters being modified, enhanced, trained to become perfect weapons while she remained unchanged and increasingly obsolete. Marcus had never been good with emotional situations, but something about Astra's pain called to every protective instinct he possessed. He took to checking on her during sleep cycles and eventually started sitting beside her bunk until her breathing settled into peaceful rhythms. "You don't have to stay," she told him one night after a particularly bad episode. "I know humans need more sleep than my species." "Maybe," Marcus replied, settling into the chair he positioned beside her bunk, "but I sleep better knowing you're okay." It was true, though he hadn't expected to admit it. Somewhere over the past weeks, Astra's well-being had become more important to him than his own comfort. The realization should have been alarming, but Marcus found it oddly peaceful. For the first time in years, he had someone who depended on him, not for his tactical expertise or his ability to follow orders, but simply for his presence. The third problem was the most dangerous. Astra was beginning to understand her own capabilities. The scientists of the Synthesis Project had been studying something when they created her sisters, and even as the unmodified control subject, Astra possessed abilities that went far beyond normal parameters for her species. She was stronger than her delicate appearance suggested, faster than any human, and her senses could detect things that Marcus's instruments missed entirely. But it was her mental capabilities that truly set her apart. Astra could process information at incredible speeds, seeing patterns and connections that would take Marcus hours to identify. When she looked at star charts, she didn't just see navigation routes, she saw the underlying mathematics of space-time itself, the elegant equations that governed hyperspace travel and gravitational interactions. "The Empire fears what they created," she explained during one of their long conversations in the ship's observation lounge. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled slowly as the broken promise drifted through hyperspace toward their next destination. The Synthesis Project wasn't just about building better soldiers. It was about building beings capable of understanding the universe on levels no existing species had ever achieved. Understanding it how? Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would be beyond his comprehension. Astra was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes reflecting the swirling colors of hyperspace. "Have you ever wondered why faster-than-light travel works the way it does? Why some routes through hyperspace are stable while others collapse into deadly storms? Why certain combinations of species can achieve technological breakthroughs that neither could accomplish alone?" Marcus shook his head. He was a soldier, not a scientist. FTL travel was technology he used, not something he needed to understand. The universe has patterns, Astra continued. Hidden structures that connect everything: matter, energy, consciousness itself. Most species can perceive fragments of these patterns. Humans see them in mathematics and art. Zephyrians sense them as crystalline harmonics. The Vorthan feel them as hunting instincts. But my sisters and I, we can see the patterns directly. And that's why the Empire wanted you dead? Yes, Astra said simply. Because beings who can see the universe's true structure might realize that the Empire's dominance isn't inevitable. They might discover that the laws governing hyperspace can be rewritten. They might learn to build weapons that could destroy entire star systems, or technologies that could free enslaved species from Imperial control. The implications hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. If Astra was telling the truth, then the 16 sleeping figures in those stasis pods represented the most dangerous threat the Empire had ever faced, not because they were perfect soldiers, but because they were perfect scientists. Beings capable of understanding and potentially rewriting the fundamental laws that kept the Empire in power. What about you? Marcus asked quietly. Can you do those things too? Astra smiled, but there was sadness in it. I was the control subject, remember? Unmodified. Inferior. I can see glimpses of the patterns, but I can't manipulate them the way my sisters could. That's why I survived. I wasn't dangerous enough to kill immediately. Over the following weeks, Marcus began to see evidence of Astra's abilities firsthand. She could predict hyperspace storm patterns days in advance, allowing them to avoid dangerous routes that would have trapped other ships. She could modify the Broken Promises systems in ways that improved their efficiency beyond anything Marcus's engineering knowledge could explain. Most unsettling of all, she seemed to know things about him that he'd never told her. You lost someone, she said one evening, as they shared a meal in the ship's tiny galley. Someone important. That's why you left the military, isn't it? Marcus nearly choked on his ration bar. He'd never mentioned his past to Astra, never talked about the events that had driven him to resign his commission and disappear into the galaxy's outer reaches. How did you? He began, then stopped. Never mind. I don't want to know. But Astra wasn't finished. Her name was Elena, she continued gently. She was a scientist, a xenobiologist studying primitive species on frontier worlds. The Empire classified her research as potential security risk and had her eliminated. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Elena, beautiful, brilliant Elena, who had seen wonder in every new species she encountered. Who had believed that understanding alien biology could help humans build a more peaceful galaxy. Who had died because some Imperial bureaucrat had decided her compassion made her a threat. Stop, Marcus said hoarsely. Just stop. Astra reached across the small table and took his hand. Her touch was warm, comforting in a way that reminded him painfully of Elena's gentle nature. I'm sorry, Astra said softly. I don't mean to cause you pain, but I need you to understand. The Empire didn't kill Elena because her research was dangerous. They killed her because her compassion was dangerous. Because she represented something they couldn't control or exploit. And what was that? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Hope, Astra replied. Hope that different species could work together. Hope that knowledge could be used to heal instead of harm. Hope that the universe could be better than it is. They sat in silence for a long time, Marcus processing the implications, while Astra watched him with those impossibly knowing eyes. Finally, he found his voice. Is that what you represent too? Hope? I don't know, Astra admitted. I'm not like my sisters. I'm flawed, limited, imperfect. But maybe that's why I survived. Maybe the universe needs flawed hope more than it needs perfect weapons. That night, Marcus lay awake in his bunk thinking about hope and perfection, about the woman he'd lost and the alien girl who was slowly becoming more important to him than his own life. Somewhere in the ship's corridors, he could hear Astra moving around, probably working on another of her impossible modifications to the ship's systems. She was changing, growing stronger and more confident every day. But she was also becoming something that Marcus couldn't quite define. Not human, obviously, but not entirely alien either. Something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. The thought should have frightened him. Instead, Marcus found himself thinking that maybe the galaxy needed something new. Maybe it needed hope, even flawed hope, more than it needed another perfect weapon in the Empire's arsenal. 6 weeks later, the Broken Promise limped into Sanctuary Station, a ramshackle trading post built inside a hollowed-out asteroid on the very edge of explored space. The station served as a haven for smugglers, refugees, and anyone else who needed to disappear from Imperial attention. It was exactly the kind of place Marcus had been avoiding since rescuing Astra, but they needed supplies, and his ship needed repairs that couldn't be completed in space. Astra had never been off the ship since Marcus found her, and he watched nervously as she took her first steps into the station's crowded corridors. She'd insisted on coming with him rather than staying hidden aboard the Broken Promise, and Marcus couldn't deny that her enhanced senses might prove useful in detecting potential threats. What he hadn't expected was the effect Astra would have on the station's other inhabitants. Within minutes of entering the main concourse, Marcus noticed people staring. Not the hostile attention he'd feared, but something closer to awe. Astra moved through the crowd with unconscious grace, her opalescent skin seeming to glow softly in the station's harsh lighting. When she spoke, people stopped to listen, drawn by a voice that carried harmonics no human throat could produce. "They're not staring because I'm alien," Astra observed quietly, as they made their way toward the parts dealer's quarter. "They're staring because I'm beautiful." It was true, though Marcus had been trying not to think about it. Over the past months, Astra had grown from a frightened child into a stunning young woman. But it was more than physical beauty. There was something about her presence that commanded attention, something that made people want to be near her. "Is that another of your species' abilities?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low. Enhanced physical appeal was one of the traits the Synthesis Project was trying to perfect, Astra admitted. Natural charisma combined with subconscious pheromone production. The idea was to create infiltrators who could gain the trust of any species they encountered. "And you have these abilities?" "To a limited degree. Remember, I was the unmodified control subject. But yes, enough to make people want to listen to me, to trust me more readily than they would a stranger." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. "Are you using them on me?" Astra stopped walking and turned to face him, her violet eyes wide with hurt. "Marcus? No, never. What I feel for you, what we have, it's real. I would never manipulate you that way." The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and Marcus immediately regretted asking the question. But it had been gnawing at him for weeks, the growing attachment he felt, the way his entire world had reorganized itself around her well-being. He needed to know it was genuine. "I'm sorry," he said softly. You needed to know," Astra finished for him. "I understand. Trust is earned, not given, and I haven't earned yours completely yet." That was the thing, Marcus realized. She had earned it. Over the past months, Astra had proven herself in countless small ways. Her courage when Imperial ships came too close to their hiding spots. Her quick thinking when ship systems failed. Her gentle care for his emotional wounds. Her refusal to use her abilities for anything but their mutual survival. "Actually," Marcus said, taking her hand, "I think you have." The smile that spread across Astra's face could have powered the station's fusion reactors. She squeezed his fingers gently, and Marcus felt that familiar warmth in his chest. Not artificial manipulation, but simple human connection, with someone who had become precious to him. Their shopping trip proceeded without incident until they reached the electronics quarter. Marcus was negotiating for new sensor arrays when Astra suddenly tensed beside him. "We need to leave," she whispered urgently. "Now." Marcus didn't question her. He'd learned to trust Astra's enhanced senses completely. He concluded his business quickly and followed her toward the nearest exit, but they were too late. 3 figures emerged from the crowd ahead of them, tall, elegant, and unmistakably Vorthan. Marcus recognized the leader immediately, Commander Serix, the scarred female who had searched his ship months ago. Her ice-cold eyes swept the crowd until they found Astra, and her lips curved in what might have been a smile on a less predatory face. "Well," Serix said, her voice carrying easily over the crowd noise, "look what interesting cargo has finally surfaced." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Astra, his hand moving instinctively toward the plasma pistol at his hip. But he knew it was useless. Vorthan warriors could move faster than human reflexes could track, and they were virtually immune to small arms fire. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said evenly. "We're just here for supplies." "Of course you are," Serix replied mockingly. "And I suppose the Theta 17 subject hiding behind you is simply a coincidence?" Behind him, Marcus felt Astra's hand touch his shoulder. The touch was light, but he could feel the tension in her fingers. "Let me handle this," she whispered. "No," Marcus replied firmly. "We stick together." But Astra was already stepping around him. moving to face the Vorthan warriors with calm dignity. The transformation in her was remarkable. Gone was the frightened refugee, replaced by something that radiated quiet authority. "Commander Serix," Astra said politely, "I remember you from the transport wreckage. You were looking for survivors." "And now I've found one," Serix replied. "You will come with us, subject. Your human protector will be allowed to leave unharmed if he cooperates." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Astra said with the same polite tone. "You see, I'm no longer Imperial property. I've claimed sanctuary under the Galactic Refugee Protection Accords." Serix's scarred face darkened. "No such accords apply to stolen Imperial assets." "I wasn't stolen," Astra replied calmly. "I was abandoned. Left to die in a failing stasis pod while my sisters were preserved. Under Imperial law, abandoned assets become salvage available to whoever recovers them." Marcus watched in amazement as Astra calmly dissected the legal framework that the Empire used to justify its actions. She wasn't just arguing semantics, she was using the Empire's own laws against them, finding loopholes that even the Vorthan couldn't dismiss. "Furthermore," Astra continued, "I have entered into a formal bonding contract with Marcus Chen, making me a dependent family member of a human citizen. Any attempt to separate us would violate multiple interspecies protection treaties." Marcus's brain stumbled over the phrase bonding contract. He'd never heard of such a thing, but the effect on Commander Serix was immediate and dramatic. The Vorthan warrior's face went completely white, and her hand moved involuntarily toward her weapon. "Impossible," Serix breathed. "Humans don't form bonds with aliens. It's against their nature." "Apparently," Astray said with a slight smile, "you don't know humans as well as you think you do." The standoff stretched for long moments, the crowd around them growing quiet as they sensed the tension. Marcus could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching them, waiting to see how the confrontation would resolve. Finally, Commander Serix spoke again, her voice like winter wind over dead stars. "This is not over," she promised. "The Empire will not allow its property to be corrupted by human sentimentality. We will be watching." The Vorthan melted back into the crowd with the fluid grace of apex predators. But Marcus knew Serix's words weren't an idle threat. They had bought themselves time, nothing more. "What the hell was that about bonding contracts?" Marcus asked as they made their way quickly back to the broken promise. Astra's cheeks flushed with color, the first time Marcus had ever seen her embarrassed. "It's complicated," she said. "Among my species, bonding is a formal declaration of permanent partnership. It creates legal protections that even the Empire has to respect. And you told them we were bonded?" "I improvised," Astra said defensively. "It was the only way to create legal complications that would give them pause." They reached the ship without further incident, but as the broken promise pulled away from Sanctuary Station, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Astra had faced down 3 Vorthan warriors with nothing but words and legal precedent. She had protected him as much as he had protected her. More importantly, she had claimed him as her bonded partner without asking his permission. The thought should have alarmed him, but instead Marcus found himself wondering what exactly a bonding contract entailed. "Astra," he said as they entered hyperspace, "about what you said back there." "It was just a legal fiction," she said quickly, not meeting his eyes. "Something to buy us time. It doesn't mean anything unless both parties consent to it." Marcus studied her profile as she focused intently on the navigation display. Her hands were steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she was avoiding his gaze. "What if they did consent?" he asked quietly. "Both parties, I mean. What would that mean?" Astra's fingers stilled on the controls. For a long moment she didn't respond. When she finally looked at him, her violet eyes held an expression he'd never seen before, hope mixed with fear, desire tempered by uncertainty. "It would mean partnership," she said softly. "True partnership, shared decisions, shared risks, shared future. Among my people, bonding is not just legal or emotional. It's a commitment to become something greater than the sum of 2 individuals." Marcus thought about Elena, about the love he'd lost and the pain he'd carried for years. Then he thought about Astra, about the way she'd changed his life simply by existing in it, about how protecting her had given him purpose again, and how her presence had filled spaces in his soul he hadn't even realized were empty. "And if one of those individuals was human?" he asked. "Then you'd be creating something the galaxy has never seen before," Astra replied. "Something that might change everything." Marcus reached out and took her hand, noting how perfectly their fingers fit together despite the differences in their bone structure. "Maybe," he said, smiling at the wonder in her eyes, "it's time the galaxy saw something new." The bonding ceremony took place 3 weeks after their encounter with Commander Serix, in the most unlikely of locations, the observation deck of a derelict space station that had been drifting in the void for over a century. Marcus had discovered the station during his salvage operations years earlier, a forgotten relic from the early days of galactic expansion, that now served as his private sanctuary when he needed to disappear completely. Astra had insisted on following her people's traditions as closely as possible, which meant finding a place where they could see the stars clearly and speak their vows under the light of distant suns. The ancient station's observation deck, with its massive transparent aluminum dome, provided the perfect venue. Marcus had never imagined himself participating in an alien bonding ceremony. The rituals were unlike anything in human culture. Complex interweaving of spoken vows, shared memories, and something Astra called harmony binding. That involved a level of mental connection Marcus wasn't sure he was prepared for. "Are you nervous?" Astra asked as they prepared for the ceremony. She wore a simple white gown that seemed to capture and reflect the starlight, making her appear almost ethereal. Her silver-blue hair had been arranged in an intricate pattern that incorporated small crystals that chimed softly when she moved. Terrified, Marcus admitted honestly. He'd opted for his dress uniform from his military days, cleaned and pressed for the first time in years. It felt strange wearing the insignia of an empire he'd grown to despise, but it was the most formal clothing he owned. "I've never done anything like this before." "Neither have I," Astra replied. And Marcus was surprised to see she looked just as nervous as he felt. Bonding ceremonies were forbidden in the laboratories. The scientists said emotional attachments would compromise our effectiveness as weapons. I only know the rituals because my species' memories are genetically encoded. They stood facing each other in the center of the observation deck, with the infinite cosmos wheeling around them. Marcus had activated every light in the station, turning the ancient structure into a beacon against the darkness. If anyone was tracking them, they would be easy to find. But tonight, Marcus didn't care about hiding. Tonight was about choosing hope over fear. Astra began the ceremony by speaking in her native language, words that flowed like music and seemed to make the crystals in her hair resonate with harmonic frequencies. Marcus couldn't understand the meaning, but he felt the emotional weight behind each phrase. When she switched to Galactic Standard, her voice carried the same musical quality. "In the sight of stars that witnessed the birth of our species," she said formally, "I offer my bond to Marcus Chen of Earth. I choose to share my strength with your strength, my knowledge with your knowledge, my future with your future." Marcus took her hands, marveling at how they seemed to fit perfectly against his own. "I don't know your language," he said quietly, "and I don't know your customs, but I know what I feel when I look at you. I choose you, Astra, not because you need protection, but because you make me want to be better than I am." The formal words of human marriage ceremonies seemed inadequate for what they were doing. This wasn't just joining two lives. It was bridging two species. Two ways of thinking about the universe. Marcus found himself speaking from the heart instead. "When I found you, I was running from everything I'd lost," he continued. "But you taught me that running from pain just means you never find joy. You showed me that caring for someone else is what makes us human. So yes, I choose to bond with you. I choose to face whatever comes together." Astra smiled, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "Then we are bonded," she said simply. "In the eyes of my people and your people and all the species of the galaxy, we are one partnership, one future, one hope." What happened next was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Astra placed her hands on either side of his face, her violet eyes holding his gaze with an intensity that seemed to reach into his soul. Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation, as if electricity was flowing between them, and suddenly he wasn't just looking at Astra. He was feeling what she felt, seeing what she saw. The harmony binding lasted only moments, but in that brief connection, Marcus experienced Astra's memories as if they were his own. He felt her terror in the laboratory, her desperation as she watched her sisters being modified, her amazement when he first showed her kindness. But he also felt her hope for the future, her growing love for the strange human who had saved her life, and her absolute certainty that together they could face anything the galaxy threw at them. When the connection faded, Marcus staggered slightly, overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. Astra caught his arm, steadying him with surprising strength. "Are you all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Marcus paused, trying to find words for what he'd just experienced. "I felt everything you felt. The fear, the pain, the hope. Is that normal for your species?" "Bonded pairs share a limited empathic connection," Astra explained. It fades over time, but it helps partners understand each other completely. There can be no deception between the bonded, no hidden thoughts or feelings that might cause discord. Marcus thought about the implications. Does that mean you felt my memories too? Astra nodded, her expression soft with understanding. I felt your pain when you lost Elena. I felt your anger at the injustice of the galaxy. And I felt your loneliness, Marcus. You've been alone for so long. Not anymore, Marcus said, pulling her close. We're partners now. Whatever comes next, we face it together. They sealed their bond with a kiss under the light of a billion stars, and Marcus felt something shift deep in his chest. For the first time since Elena's death, he felt complete. The hollow ache that had driven him to the galaxy's edge was gone, replaced by a warmth that seemed to radiate from his very core. Their honeymoon period lasted exactly 6 days. Marcus woke on the 7th morning to the sound of proximity alarms screaming through the broken promise. He rolled out of the bunk he now shared with Astra, noting that she was already awake and moving toward the bridge with the fluid grace he'd come to associate with her enhanced reflexes. What's our status? Marcus asked as he joined her at the sensor display. 12 ships approaching, Astra replied grimly. Imperial configuration, but not standard fleet vessels. These are specialized hunters. Marcus studied the sensor readouts and felt his blood turn cold. The approaching ships were Vorthan hunter-killers, the Empire's most elite pursuit vessels. Fast, heavily armed, and crewed by warriors bred specifically for tracking down high-value targets. They found us, he said quietly. Yes, Astra agreed, but not by accident. Look at their formation. Marcus examined the tactical display more carefully. The hunter-killers were approaching in a perfect encirclement pattern, their positions calculated to prevent any escape regardless of which direction the Broken Promise tried to run. This wasn't a random patrol. It was a carefully planned hunt. Someone gave them our position, Marcus realized. Someone who knew exactly where to find us. Commander Serix, Astra said with certainty. She's been tracking us since Sanctuary Station, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The communication panel crackled to life, and the familiar voice of the scarred Vorthan commander filled the bridge. Marcus Chen, Serix said formally, you are harboring stolen Imperial property in violation of 17 interstellar treaties. Surrender the Theta, 1-7 subject immediately, and your execution will be swift. Marcus activated the response channel. The name is Astra, he said firmly. And she's not Imperial property. She's my bonded partner, protected under... Your bonding ceremony was observed and recorded, Serix interrupted coldly. The Empire does not recognize interspecies partnerships as legally valid. The subject will be returned to Imperial custody for immediate termination. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. They had been watched during their most intimate moment. Their private ceremony turned into evidence for prosecution. The violation felt worse than any weapon wound he'd ever received. You're making a mistake, Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice level. Astra isn't just a refugee anymore. She's part of something bigger than your empire. Killing her won't stop what's coming. There was a pause before Serix responded, and when she did, Marcus could hear genuine curiosity in her voice. And what exactly is coming, human?
Marcus looked at Astra, seeing the same determination in her violet eyes that he felt in his own heart.
They had spent weeks talking about the future, about the changes that were already beginning to ripple through the galaxy as news of their partnership spread. Sanctuary Station had been just the beginning. Across human space, people were talking about the alien girl and the human who loved her enough to defy an empire. Change, Marcus said simply. Real change. Your empire is built on the idea that species can't work together. The cooperation is weakness. But we're proving that wrong every day we exist. One bonded pair does not constitute a revolution, Serix replied dismissively. Maybe not, Astra said, activating her own communication channel. But we're not alone anymore. As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing on the sensor display. Ships dropping out of hyperspace around the derelict station. Dozens of them, representing half a dozen different species. Marcus recognized some of the configurations. Human independents, Zephyrian refugees, even a few Altarian merchant vessels. But others were completely alien to him, species he'd never seen before. What is this? Serix demanded, her composed voice showing the first signs of uncertainty. This is what hope looks like, Astra replied. Word of our bonding has spread across the galaxy, Commander. To every species your empire has oppressed, every world you've conquered, every people you've told that cooperation is impossible. We represent proof that you're wrong. The newcomer fleet took up positions around the station, not quite surrounding the Vorthan ships but making their intentions clear. Marcus watched the tactical display in amazement as more contacts appeared. The response was far larger than anything he'd imagined possible. "They came to protect us," he said wonderingly. "They came to protect what we represent," Astra corrected. "Hope for a different future. Hope that the Empire's dominance isn't inevitable." Commander Serex's voice returned, now carrying an edge of genuine anger.
You cannot protect them indefinitely.
The Empire has resources beyond your comprehension, and the Empire has enemies beyond your comprehension, replied a new voice on the communication channel. Marcus recognized the harmonic tones of a Zephyrian elder. "Greetings, bonded ones. I am Elder Crystalsong of the Free Zephyrian Collective. We have come to offer you sanctuary among our people." More voices joined the communication net, representatives from a dozen different species, each offering aid to the unlikely pair who had somehow become a symbol of resistance. Marcus listened in amazement as the galaxy's scattered rebel groups coordinated their response in real time. "This is impossible," Serex said, but Marcus could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. "Your empire taught the galaxy that different species couldn't work together," said another voice. "This one carrying the mechanical undertones of an artificial intelligence. But cooperation is emerging despite your efforts. The bonded pair has accelerated a process that was already beginning." Marcus looked at Astra with new understanding. "You knew this would happen," he said. "When you suggested the bonding ceremony, you knew it would trigger something like this." Astra's expression was apologetic but determined. "I hoped it might. My species can see patterns, remember? I could see the threads of connection forming across the galaxy. Refugees talking to each other, rebel groups sharing information, even AIs beginning to question their programming. Our bonding wasn't just about us, Marcus. It was about giving everyone else permission to hope." The revelation should have made Marcus angry, but instead he felt a surge of admiration for the woman he'd chosen as his partner. She had seen possibilities he never could have imagined, and taken actions that required incredible courage. This was why the Empire had feared her people, not just for their scientific abilities, but for their capacity to inspire others. "The offer of sanctuary is appreciated," Marcus said into the communication net, "but we can't hide forever. If we're going to change things, we need to do more than just survive." "What do you propose?" asked Elder Crystalsong. Marcus looked at Astra again, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her violet eyes. They had started something with their bonding ceremony, but starting a revolution wasn't the same as winning one. If they wanted to create lasting change, they needed to strike at the heart of the Empire's power. "We go back for her sisters," Marcus said firmly. "The ones still sleeping in those stasis pods. The Empire fears what they represent, beings capable of understanding and manipulating the fundamental forces of the universe. If we can wake them up, if we can show them a different path than the one their creators planned, it would change everything." Astra finished. 16 enhanced beings, working together, sharing their knowledge freely instead of serving imperial interests. The technological breakthroughs alone could shift the balance of power permanently. "The transport wreckage is in heavily defended imperial space," the AI voice pointed out. "Reaching it would require fighting through multiple defense lines." "Then we fight," said a new voice. Human, carrying the crisp authority of a military commander. "This is Captain Sarah Reynolds, of the independent cruiser Defiance. My crew and I have been waiting for something worth fighting for. I think we just found it." More voices joined in, captains and commanders from across the impromptu fleet, offering their ships and crews for what everyone understood was a desperate mission. Marcus felt a strange combination of humility and pride as he realized that his decision to save one alien child had somehow inspired hundreds of people to risk their lives for a better future. "Commander Serex," Astra said formally, "you have a choice to make. You can try to stop us here, in which case you'll be fighting representatives from dozens of species who have chosen to work together despite your Empire's teachings. Or you can return to your superiors and tell them that change is coming whether they accept it or not." There was a long silence before the Vorthan commander responded. When she did, her voice carried a note Marcus had never heard from her before: uncertainty. "This is not over," Serex said finally. "The Empire will not allow its authority to be challenged by a coalition of rebels and outcasts. The Empire's authority was challenged the moment a human chose to save an alien child instead of turning her over for execution," Astra replied. "Everything else is just the consequences of that choice." The Vorthan ships withdrew without firing a shot, their perfect formation breaking apart as they retreated to a safe distance. Marcus knew they would be back with reinforcements, but for now, the immediate threat had passed. "Well," Marcus said as the tension finally began to ease, "I guess we're officially leaders of a rebellion now." Astra smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "I prefer to think of it as leading a family," she said. "The largest family the galaxy has ever seen." Over the following hours, the diverse fleet organized itself with surprising efficiency. Ship captains shared resources, tactical information, and technology in a display of cooperation that would have been impossible under Imperial rule. Marcus found himself thrust into a leadership role he'd never wanted, but as he watched former enemies working together toward a common goal, he began to understand what Astra had seen in her patterns. This wasn't just about rescuing her sisters or striking back at the Empire. This was about proving that a different kind of civilization was possible, one based on choice rather than conquest, cooperation rather than domination. It was the kind of future Elena had dreamed of, the kind of galaxy worth fighting for. "Are you ready for this?" Astra asked that evening as they stood together on the observation deck, watching the mixed fleet prepare for departure. "Once we attempt this mission, there's no going back. We'll be committed to revolution whether we succeed or fail." Marcus thought about the question seriously. A few months ago, he'd been a bitter old soldier hiding from his past at the edge of known space. Now he was preparing to lead a coalition of rebels against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. It should have been terrifying. Instead, he felt more alive than he had in years. "I'm ready," he said, taking her hand in his. "We started this together, and we'll finish it together. Whatever happens." Astra squeezed his fingers, her touch warm and reassuring. "Then let's go wake up my sisters," she said with a smile that could have lit up the void itself. "It's time to show the galaxy what real cooperation looks like." As the mixed fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Marcus looked out at the stars one last time as a simple salvage operator. When they emerged from FTL, he would be something else entirely, a leader in humanity's greatest adventure.
The thought should have been daunting.
Instead, Marcus found himself grinning with anticipation for whatever came next. The assault on the Kethvar system began at 040 hours Galactic Standard Time, when 67 ships from 16 different species dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation around the heavily fortified Imperial Research Station. Marcus had never seen anything like it, former enemies working together with a precision that should have taken years to achieve. All coordinated through communication protocols that Elder Crystal Song's people had developed in just 3 days. The Zephyrians had proven to be natural coordinators, their crystalline neural networks allowing them to process multiple data streams simultaneously. Captain Reynolds' tactical expertise provided the military framework, while the AI consciousness known as Harmony served as a real-time communication hub between species with completely different thought processes. It was cooperation on a scale that the Empire insisted was impossible. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Defiance, the independent cruiser that had become the impromptu flagship of their unlikely fleet. Beside him, Astra monitored sensor readings while maintaining a constant communication link with ship commanders across the coalition. Her enhanced perception allowed her to track battle developments faster than any conventional tactical computer.
"Imperial response is mobilizing," reported Captain Reynolds, her weathered face focused on the tactical display.
12 heavy cruisers moving to intercept, plus the station's defensive batteries. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they coordinate a real response." "That's all we need," Astra said confidently. "The transport wreckage is in orbital sector 7, approximately 3 kilometers from the main station. If we can reach it before the Imperial fleet arrives, before they arrive and blow us all to pieces," Reynolds corrected grimly. "Marcus, are you sure about this? We're risking a lot of lives for 16 sleeping aliens who might not even wake up." Marcus understood her concern. The Coalition fleet was impressive, but it was still vastly outnumbered by Imperial forces in this system. If they failed to retrieve Astra's sisters quickly, the mission would become a massacre. "They'll wake up," Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. "And when they do, they'll change everything." The truth was, he had no guarantee that the stasis pods had remained intact over the past months. Imperial forces might have destroyed them or moved them to a more secure location, but Astra's enhanced sensors had detected the familiar biosignatures among the wreckage, and Marcus had learned to trust her perceptions completely. "Beginning attack run," announced Commander Vexthai, the Altarian pilot leading the assault wing. "All ships maintain formation and target designated defensive positions." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded military history. Instead of the usual chaos of interspecies warfare, the Coalition ships moved with perfect coordination. Zephyrian vessels provided shield harmonics that protected human ships from energy weapons. Altairian fighters used their superior speed to draw fire away from slower cargo haulers. Even the AI ships seemed to anticipate their organic allies' needs, repositioning themselves to provide covering fire without being asked. Marcus watched the tactical display in amazement as former enemies worked together with seamless efficiency. "How are they coordinating like this?" he asked Astra. "They're not just cooperating," Astra replied, her eyes still fixed on the sensor readings. "They're learning from each other in real time. Each species is sharing their tactical advantages with the others, creating hybrid strategies that no single fleet could achieve." A brilliant flash lit up the viewport as the first Imperial heavy cruiser exploded under concentrated fire from 6 different ship types. The Imperial forces were individually superior to anything in the Coalition fleet, but they couldn't adapt to the unprecedented level of coordination their enemies were displaying. "This is what the Empire fears most," Astra continued, her voice filled with wonder. "Not superior weapons or larger fleets, but the possibility that different species might actually work together instead of fighting each other." The Defiant shuddered as they passed through the debris field surrounding the research station. Marcus could see the transport wreckage ahead, exactly where they'd left it months ago. The stasis chamber section appeared intact, though Imperial forces had clearly been studying it extensively. "Boarding teams, prepare for deployment," Captain Reynolds announced. "We'll have maybe 5 minutes before the reinforcements arrive." Marcus was already suited up in combat armor, with Astra beside him in her own protective gear. They would lead the boarding team personally. Astra because her enhanced biology made her the only one who could safely interface with the stasis systems, and Marcus because he couldn't bear the thought of sending her into danger without him. "Remember," Astra said as they entered the boarding pod, "my sisters have been asleep for months. They'll be disoriented, possibly hostile. The Empire programmed them to view any non-Imperial species as enemies." "What about you?" Marcus asked. "Will they recognize you?" Astra's expression was uncertain. "I hope so. We share genetic memories up to a certain point. But they were modified after that point, enhanced in ways I wasn't. I don't know how much those changes affected their personalities." The boarding pod launched from the Defiance with 12 other team members, humans, Zephyrians, and Altairians working together despite having been enemies just weeks earlier. Marcus watched the transport wreckage grow larger through the pod's viewport, noting new damage from Imperial investigation teams. They docked with the derelict transport using magnetic clamps, and Marcus led the way through corridors that brought back uncomfortable memories. The bodies of the Zephyrian crew were gone, removed by Imperial salvage teams, but the scars of battle remained. Weapon burns in the walls, twisted metal where explosions had torn through bulkheads, the lingering smell of death and destruction. The biocontainment area looked different than Marcus remembered. Imperial technicians had installed new monitoring equipment around the stasis pods, and several of the chambers showed signs of having been opened and resealed. Marcus felt a chill of apprehension as he realized the Empire had been experimenting on Astra's sleeping sisters. "They're alive," Astra announced with relief, her enhanced senses confirming what the readouts displayed. All 16 of them. "But Marcus, they've been altered." "Altered how?" Astra moved to the nearest stasis pod, her hands dancing over the control interface with practiced ease. "Additional neural conditioning. Behavioral modification. The Empire has been trying to reprogram them even while they slept. Can you reverse it?" "I don't know. But we have to try." The awakening process was more complex than Marcus had expected. Each stasis pod required individual calibration, with careful monitoring of brain activity and biochemical balance. Astra worked with desperate efficiency while the sounds of battle echoed through the station's hull, Imperial reinforcements engaging the Coalition fleet in increasingly desperate combat. "First pod is opening," Astra announced. Marcus positioned himself where the emerging figure could see him clearly, hoping his non-threatening posture would prevent an immediate attack. The stasis chamber hissed open, releasing preservation fluid and revealing a figure identical to Astra in every detail except for one crucial difference. Her eyes held none of Astra's warmth or curiosity, only cold calculation. The enhanced being sat up with fluid grace, her gaze sweeping the chamber before settling on Marcus. When she spoke, her voice carried the same musical quality as Astra's, but the words were like ice. "Identify yourself, inferior species," she commanded in perfect galactic standard. "Explain why you have awakened Synthesis Unit Theta 10-2. Marcus felt his heart sink. The conditioning had worked. This wasn't Astra's sister, but a weapon programmed to view humans as inferior. Behind him, he could hear more stasis pods opening, as Astra continued the awakening sequence. "My name is Marcus Chen," he said carefully, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. "I'm here with your sister Astra. We've come to rescue you from Imperial custody." Theta, 2's perfectly beautiful face showed no recognition of the name. "I have no sister. I am a unique creation of the Synthesis Project, designed to serve the Empire's strategic interests. You will explain your presence aboard this vessel or face termination." Before Marcus could respond, Astra appeared beside him, her expression heartbroken as she looked at the creature that shared her face but not her humanity. "Sister," Astra said softly, using a harmonic frequency that seemed to resonate with the crystals embedded in the chamber walls. "Listen to my voice. Remember the time before the modifications, before the conditioning. Remember our Creator's first words to us. You are perfect as you are." For a moment, something flickered in Theta, 2's cold eyes. A flash of confusion, perhaps even recognition, but it passed quickly, replaced by renewed hostility. "Deception," Theta, 2 declared. "I am the only successful subject of the Theta series. All others were terminated for inadequate performance. You are an inferior copy attempting to confuse my programming." Around the chamber, more of Astra's sisters were awakening, each one emerging from stasis with the same cold perfection. Marcus watched in growing horror as 16 enhanced beings took defensive positions around the room, their movements coordinated with predatory precision. They were everything the Empire had wanted. Perfect soldiers without conscience or doubt. "Astra," Marcus said quietly, "we need to go. Now." But Astra refused to give up on her sisters. She moved to the center of the room, placing herself between Marcus and the enhanced beings who regarded them both as enemies. "I know you can hear me," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to fill the entire chamber. "I know the conditioning runs deep, but underneath it, you're still who you were created to be. Not weapons, not tools, beings capable of choice." "Choice is inefficient," replied Theta, 5, her voice identical to Astra's but empty of emotion. "The Empire has optimized our thought processes to eliminate unnecessary decision-making. We serve. We obey. We eliminate threats to Imperial authority." Marcus felt the temperature in the room seem to drop as 16 pairs of violet eyes focused on him with deadly intent. These weren't Astra's sisters anymore. They were exactly what the Empire had wanted to create, perfect killers without mercy or hesitation. "Stand down," commanded Theta. 2, apparently the leader of the group. "Imperial citizens will be detained for interrogation. Non-Imperial species will be terminated immediately. I am Theta." 1-7. Astra said desperately, using her original designation. "Your control subject. Your genetic template. I have the same memories you do. The laboratory, the testing, the modifications you underwent while I remained unchanged." For the first time, the enhanced beings showed uncertainty. They knew Theta, 1-7's designation, understood her role in their creation. But the conditioning ran deep, and their programming insisted that she had been terminated months ago. "Impossible," said Theta, 9. Theta, 1-7 was destroyed with the transport vessel. Imperial records confirm termination. "Dear, Imperial records are wrong," Astra replied firmly. "I survived because someone chose to save me instead of leaving me to die. Someone showed me that there was another way to exist besides serving the Empire's interests." She gestured toward Marcus, her movements careful and non-threatening. "This human found me dying in a failing stasis pod and chose to help me instead of turning me over to the authorities. He taught me that beings can choose to cooperate instead of dominate, to protect instead of destroy." The enhanced beings processed this information with visible confusion. Their programming told them that humans were inferior, that cooperation between species was impossible. But Astra's existence challenged those fundamental assumptions. "Demonstrate," commanded Theta, 2 after a moment's consideration. "If cooperation is possible, demonstrate its effectiveness." Marcus realized what she was asking for. The enhanced beings wanted proof that the cooperation Astra claimed was possible could actually work in practice. It was a test, and failure would mean immediate termination. "Prometheus," Marcus said, activating his communication link, "patch me through to the fleet coordination network." The response was immediate. Elder Crystal Song's harmonic voice filled the chamber, followed by Captain Reynolds' tactical updates, Commander Vexthai's status reports, and Harmony's real-time battle analysis. For 30 seconds, Marcus let the enhanced beings listen to 16 different species working together with seamless coordination. "This is impossible," whispered Theta. 1, 2, her perfect composure cracking for the first time. "Species cannot coordinate at this level. The Empire has proven that biological incompatibilities prevent effective cooperation." "The Empire lied to you," Astra said gently, "just as they lied to me. They taught us that we were created to be weapons because weapons don't ask questions. But we were created to be so much more." She moved to the chamber's central console, her fingers dancing over controls with practiced ease. The display screens around the room lit up with images from the current battle, coalition ships moving in perfect harmony, former enemies sharing shield power and tactical data, crews from different species working together as if they'd trained together for years. "This is what you were really created for," Astra continued. "Not to destroy, but to build. Not to serve one empire, but to help create something better. Your enhanced abilities were never meant to make you better weapons. They were meant to make you better bridge builders."
Theta,
Seven stepped forward, her expression showing the first signs of genuine curiosity. "The tactical coordination displayed is remarkable. How are they achieving such efficiency?" "By choosing to trust each other," Marcus said, finding his voice again. "By deciding that cooperation is more powerful than conquest. By believing that different doesn't have to mean enemy." The enhanced beings exchanged glances, their identical faces showing varying degrees of confusion and interest. The conditioning was strong, but they were too intelligent to ignore evidence that contradicted their programming. "You speak of choice?" said Theta. 1-4. "But we are weapons. Weapons do not choose their targets." "Crap you! You're not weapons," Astra said firmly. "You're my sisters, and I'm offering you the same choice someone once offered me. The choice to be something other than what your creators intended." Outside the transport, the sounds of battle were growing more intense. Marcus knew they were running out of time. Either the Coalition fleet would be forced to retreat, or Imperial reinforcements would arrive in overwhelming numbers. "We need to leave," he said urgently. "All of us, together. But it has to be your choice." "Theta, contact." Two studied him with those cold violet eyes, and Marcus could practically see the calculations running through her enhanced mind. Finally, she spoke. 2. "You claim that cooperation is more effective than domination," she said. "Prove it. Help us understand why we should abandon our programming in favor of your theories." Marcus looked at Astra, seeing his own desperation reflected in her eyes. They had minutes, maybe less, before the situation became impossible. How do you convince someone to abandon everything they've been taught in the span of a few heartbeats? The answer came from an unexpected source. "Because," said a new voice from the chamber entrance, "love is stronger than fear." Marcus turned to see Elder Crystal Song standing in the doorway, her crystalline features glowing with soft internal light. Behind her stood Captain Reynolds, Commander Vexthai, and a dozen other coalition leaders who had risked everything to be here. "We came because we couldn't bear the thought of leaving anyone behind," Elder Crystal Song continued, her harmonic voice filling the chamber with impossible beauty. "Human, Zephyrian, Altarian, artificial intelligence. None of that matters when someone needs help." Theta, 3. Stared at the mixed group of species standing together in the chamber entrance. "You entered a combat zone to rescue beings you have never met? We entered a combat zone to rescue family," Captain Reynolds said simply. "Because that's what Astra and Marcus taught us. That family isn't about species or genetics. It's about choosing to care for each other." The enhanced beings processed this information with visible struggle. Everything they'd been taught said that such cooperation was impossible, that species would inevitably betray each other for advantage. But the evidence stood before them. Former enemies who had risked their lives for strangers. "I do not understand," admitted Theta. 8. Her perfect composure finally cracking completely. "Why would you endanger yourselves for beings you perceive as threats?" "Because," Astra said softly, "that's what families do. They protect each other, even when it's dangerous. Even when it doesn't make logical sense." She stepped forward and took Theta 8's hands in her own. "Sister, I know the conditioning runs deep. I know it's easier to follow programming than to think for yourself. But I'm asking you to try. Just for a moment, imagine what it would feel like to choose your own path." For a long moment the chamber was silent except for the distant sounds of battle. Then, Slowly, something changed in Theta. 8 expression. The cold calculation faded, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. I can feel it, she whispered. The connection you spoke of. The harmony between different minds working toward a common goal. It's beautiful. One by one, the other enhanced beings began to show similar changes. The imperial conditioning was powerful, but it couldn't completely suppress their fundamental nature. They had been created to understand universal patterns, to see connections that others missed, and the greatest pattern in the universe was the one that connected all conscious beings in a web of mutual dependence. We choose, said Theta. Too finally, her voice no longer cold but filled with newfound warmth. We choose to learn what it means to be family. The evacuation that followed was chaotic but effective. The enhanced beings moved with their characteristic fluid grace, but now it was directed toward helping rather than harming. They assisted with carrying equipment, coordinated with the coalition forces, and displayed the kind of tactical awareness that turned a desperate retreat into a masterful withdrawal. Marcus found himself running beside Astra as they made their way back to the boarding pods, her sisters moving around them like a protective guard. The sound of pursuit echoed through the corridors. Imperial forces had finally breached the transport's outer hull. Can they really change? Marcus asked as they reached the boarding bay. Or will the conditioning reassert itself? I don't know, Astra admitted. But, Marcus, what I felt from them in that moment, that was real. The love, the curiosity, the desire to understand. The Empire tried to erase those things, but they couldn't destroy them completely. The boarding pods launched just as Imperial troops reached the bay, energy weapons scorching the hull where they had been docked moments before. Marcus watched through the viewport as the derelict transport fell away behind them, taking with it the last physical reminder of the synthesis project. But the real synthesis was just beginning. Back aboard the Defiance, Marcus watched in fascination as Astra's sisters adapted to their new environment with incredible speed. They moved through the ship's corridors with careful curiosity, examining everything from the mixed species crew to the hybrid technologies that had allowed such unprecedented cooperation. The tactical applications are remarkable, Theta. Tu told Captain Reynolds as she studied the bridge displays. Your species' emotional decision-making combines with Zephyrian pattern recognition to create strategic possibilities that pure logic could never achieve. That's the point, Reynolds replied with a grin. We're not trying to be perfect. We're trying to be better together than we could be apart. In the ship's common area, Marcus found Elder Crystal Song sharing harmonic meditation techniques with several of the enhanced beings, their identical faces showing expressions of wonder as they experienced cooperative consciousness for the first time. They're learning so fast, Marcus said to Astra as they watched the interactions. They were designed to learn, Astra replied. The Empire just tried to control what they learned. Now that they're free to choose their own knowledge, she gestured toward Theta 1, 2, who was working with the ship's AI to develop new communication protocols that could bridge the gap between organic and artificial consciousness. Already their collaboration had produced interface designs that neither could have achieved alone. They're becoming what they were really meant to be, Astra continued. Not weapons of destruction, but tools of creation. Bridge builders between different ways of thinking. Over the following days, as the Coalition fleet regrouped in a hidden nebula, Marcus watched the enhanced beings integrate into their new family with remarkable success. They brought capabilities that no one had imagined. The ability to see patterns across multiple disciplines simultaneously. To understand the deep connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena. To envision possibilities that pure human imagination couldn't conceive. But more than their enhanced abilities, they brought something else. Proof that the Empire's fundamental assumptions were wrong. If beings engineered specifically to serve Imperial interests could choose cooperation over domination, then change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. What happens now? Marcus asked Astra one evening as they stood together on the observation deck, watching stars wheel past through the nebula's glowing gases. Now we show the galaxy what real synthesis looks like, Astra replied. My sisters and I were created to understand universal patterns. But the most important pattern isn't mathematical or physical, it's social. The pattern that connects all conscious beings in a network of mutual support. She leaned against his shoulder, her warmth a constant reminder of how much his life had changed since that first distress beacon. The Empire thinks power comes from dominance, she continued. But true power comes from connection. And we're going to teach the galaxy that difference. Marcus looked out at the mixed fleet surrounding them. Dozens of ships representing multiple species, all working together toward a common goal. A few months ago, such cooperation would have been impossible. Now, it was becoming the foundation for something entirely new. Think it'll work? He asked. Astra smiled, her violet eyes reflecting the nebula's ethereal light. Marcus, you taught me that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is choose to care about someone. We've built a family across species lines. We've proven that cooperation can overcome any obstacle. And now, we have 16 enhanced beings who can help others see the patterns we've discovered. She took his hand in hers, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. It's not just going to work, she said with absolute certainty. It's going to change everything. 2 years after the rescue of the Synthesis sisters, Marcus stood on the observation deck of New Haven, a massive space station built from the combined technologies of 17 different species, and marveled at what they had accomplished. Through the transparent aluminum dome, he could see ships from across the galaxy docking at the station's multiple bays. Human vessels worked alongside Zephyrian crystal ships. Altarian speedsters shared traffic lanes with artificial intelligence platforms, and at least a dozen species he still couldn't identify moved freely through the civilian sectors. It was the galaxy's first truly integrated civilization, and it had all started with one human's decision to save an alien child. The transformation accelerates daily, said Theta. 2, who now went by the name Symphony at her own request. She approached Marcus with the fluid grace that marked all of Astra's sisters, but her movements carried none of their original cold precision. 2 years of freedom had taught the enhanced beings to appreciate beauty as well as efficiency. 17 more worlds declared independence from the Empire yesterday. 3 new species have requested entry into the Coalition. Marcus smiled at the change in her. Symphony bore Astra's face, but her personality had developed in unique directions as she explored what it meant to choose her own identity. Where Astra was intuitive and empathetic, Symphony was analytical and strategic. She had become the Coalition's primary tactical coordinator, designing defensive strategies that could protect hundreds of worlds while minimizing casualties on both sides. Any word from the core worlds? Marcus asked. The Emperor has called for a new offensive, Symphony replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly concerned. Admiral Korath's Fifth Fleet is mobilizing for what Imperial propaganda calls the final suppression of rebel activities. 300 ships, including 12 dreadnoughts. And our response? Symphony's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. We're going to show them something they've never seen before, something that will make them reconsider their approach to galactic governance. Marcus had learned not to question the enhanced beings when they spoke with such confidence. Astra's sisters had spent 2 years studying the Empire's weaknesses, and their insights had proven accurate time and again. The Imperial war machine was powerful, but it was designed for fighting conventional enemies. It had no protocols for dealing with opponents who refused to follow traditional rules of engagement. Where's Astra? Marcus asked, noting his wife's absence from the observation deck. In the synthesis chamber, Symphony replied. Working with Harmony and Elder Crystal Song on the new project. She asked me to tell you that it's almost ready. Marcus felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. For months, Astra and her sisters had been working on something they called the Connection Protocol, a way to extend their enhanced pattern recognition abilities to other species. The details were beyond Marcus's understanding, but the implications were staggering. If they succeeded, any being in the galaxy could learn to see the deep connections that held the universe together. Marcus made his way through New Haven's bustling corridors, noting the easy interactions between species that had been enemies just years earlier. Children from different worlds played together in the common areas, their laughter creating harmonies that transcended species barriers. Scientists shared research across biological and cultural divides. Artists collaborated on works that no single species could have imagined. It was everything Elena had dreamed of, everything Marcus had thought impossible. And at the center of it all was the woman he'd found dying in a derelict transport, who had somehow become the catalyst for the greatest transformation in galactic history. The synthesis chamber was located at New Haven's heart, a vast spherical room where the laws of physics seemed to work differently than anywhere else. As Marcus entered, he felt the familiar tingling sensation that indicated the presence of technologies beyond conventional understanding. The chamber walls were lined with crystalline matrices that pulsed with soft light, creating patterns that seemed to respond to the thoughts and emotions of those within. Astra stood at the room's center, her silver hair flowing around her as she manipulated holographic displays that showed the quantum structure of consciousness itself. Around her, her sisters worked with representatives from dozens of species, mapping the neural patterns that govern perception and understanding. "Marcus," Astra said without turning around, her enhanced awareness detecting his presence before he spoke. "Perfect timing. We're about to run the first full-scale test." "Test of what?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he wouldn't fully understand the answer. "The connection protocol," said Harmony, the AI consciousness that had become one of Astra's closest collaborators. "A method for expanding consciousness beyond the limitations of individual biological architecture. Theoretical simulations suggest it will allow any being to perceive the universal patterns that currently only enhanced individuals can detect." Elder Crystal Song approached Marcus, her crystalline features glowing with excitement. "Imagine, Marcus Chen, if every being in the galaxy could see the connections between all things, could understand that separation is illusion, that all consciousness is part of a single universal pattern. How could the Empire maintain its dominance when everyone could see the truth of our interconnection?" The implications were overwhelming. The Empire's power rested on the assumption that different species were fundamentally incompatible, that cooperation was limited and temporary. But if everyone could see the deep patterns that connected all conscious beings, how does it work? Marcus asked. Astra finally turned to face him, her violet eyes shining with the same wonder he'd first seen when she'd chosen her name. "Remember our bonding ceremony? The moment when we shared consciousness, when you could feel what I felt and see what I saw." Marcus nodded. The memory was still vivid, that brief instant of perfect understanding when the barriers between them had dissolved completely. "The connection protocol creates a similar experience," Astra continued. "But instead of linking two individuals, it connects each participant to the universal pattern that underlies all consciousness. For a few moments, they can see reality as my sisters and I see it. As a vast web of connections where every being affects every other being. And you think this will stop the Imperial offensive?" "I think," said Symphony, materializing beside them with her characteristic grace, "that Admiral Korath's fleet is about to discover that their enemies are not what they expected." The test began an hour later, with volunteers from 16 different species taking positions around the chamber's perimeter. Marcus watched as Astra and her sisters initiated the protocol. Their enhanced abilities reaching out to touch the consciousness of each participant. The crystalline matrices around the chamber began to pulse more rapidly, creating patterns of light that seemed to burrow directly into the brain. Then something extraordinary happened. The volunteers, human, Zephyrian, Altarian, artificial intelligence, and species Marcus had never seen before, began to move with perfect coordination. Not the military precision he'd witnessed in battle, but something far more organic. They moved like parts of a single organism, each individual contributing their unique abilities to a greater whole. "By the stars," whispered Dr. Basil. Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, despite the shared surname, a human xenobiologist who was monitoring the participants' vital signs. Their neural patterns are synchronizing.
Not just harmonizing, but actually creating a shared consciousness network.
Marcus watched in awe as the test subjects began to work together on complex problems that would normally require teams of specialists.
A Zephyrian engineer and a human physicist collaborated on equations that neither could have solved alone. An Altarian artist and an AI consciousness created musical compositions that expressed mathematical principles in pure harmony. Most remarkably, they all seemed to understand what was happening to them. The fear and confusion that usually accompanied first contact between species was completely absent. Instead, there was recognition. The deep understanding that despite their different forms, they were all expressions of the same fundamental reality. "The pattern holds," Astra announced, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "Full implementation is possible." But before anyone could respond, proximity alarms began blaring throughout the station. The test was interrupted as participants returned to normal consciousness, looking dazed but transformed by their experience. "Admiral Korath's fleet has arrived," Symphony announced calmly. 300 Imperial ships, just as predicted. "They're demanding our immediate surrender." Marcus felt the familiar knot of tension in his stomach. Despite all their achievements, the coalition was still outnumbered by Imperial forces. Their integrated technologies and cooperative strategies had won them many victories. But this was different. This was the Empire's full military might, focused on destroying everything they had built. "What's our fleet strength?" he asked. 437 ships, Symphony replied.
But Marcus, numbers are irrelevant for what we're about to attempt.
What do you mean? Astra took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring despite the circumstances. We're going to offer Admiral Korath and his fleet the same thing we've offered everyone else. The choice to see reality as it truly is. You want to use the connection protocol on an Imperial fleet?
Astra, that's impossible. They'll never consent to it. They don't have to consent, said Harmony. The protocol can be implemented through communication channels. One moment of contact is enough to establish the connection. Marcus understood immediately. You're going to hack their minds.
We're going to show them the truth, Astra corrected gently.
The truth about what they're really fighting for and what they're really fighting against. The confrontation began 30 minutes later, when Admiral Korath's massive dreadnought established a communication link with New Haven. Marcus stood on the command deck beside Astra and her sisters, watching as one of the Empire's most decorated officers appeared on the main display. Admiral Korath was exactly what Marcus expected from an Imperial commander. Tall, stern, with the kind of rigid bearing that came from a lifetime of unquestioned obedience to authority. His uniform was immaculate, his expression coldly professional as he surveyed the Coalition's leadership. I am Admiral Korath of the 5th Imperial Fleet, he announced formally. You are harboring stolen Imperial property and fomenting rebellion against lawful authority. Surrender immediately, and your deaths will be swift. Admiral, Astra replied, stepping forward with the dignified bearing she'd developed over 2 years of leadership. I am Astra Chen, formerly designated Theta, 1-7 of the Synthesis Project. I'm offering you an alternative to violence. Korath's expression showed the first flicker of interest. The failed synthesis subject. You were reported destroyed. I was reported expendable, Astra corrected. There's a difference. But that's not why I'm contacting you, Admiral. I want to show you something that will change how you see the galaxy. I see the galaxy clearly enough. I see rebels who must be crushed and order that must be restored. Do you? Astra asked gently. Or do you see what the Empire has taught you to see? Admiral, what if I told you that everything you believe about species compatibility, about the necessity of Imperial control, was based on deliberately false information? Marcus watched Korath's face carefully, looking for any sign that Astra's words were having an effect. The Admiral's expression remained professionally neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he was listening. You have 30 seconds to surrender, Korath said finally. After that, my fleet will begin bombardment. Then I suppose we have 30 seconds to show you the truth, Astra replied. She nodded to Symphony, who activated the connection protocol through the open communication channel. Marcus watched as the familiar patterns of light began to pulse through the transmission, carrying with them the essence of the universal consciousness network that Astra and her sisters had learned to perceive. The effect on Admiral Korath was immediate and dramatic. His rigid posture faltered as his mind was suddenly flooded with perceptions beyond anything he'd ever experienced. Marcus could see the moment when the Admiral first grasped the true scope of the universe, not as a collection of competing species fighting for dominance, but as a single vast organism of interconnected consciousness. Impossible, Korath whispered, his professional composure completely shattered. This is reality, Astra said gently. This is what you've been fighting against without realizing it. Not rebellion, but evolution. Not chaos, but the natural progression toward greater harmony. The connection lasted only moments, but Marcus could see that it was enough. When Korath's awareness returned to normal, his face showed the same wonder that Marcus had seen in countless others who had experienced the protocol for the first time. I can still feel it, the Admiral said quietly. The connections, the patterns. How is this possible? Because, said Symphony, consciousness is not limited by biology. The Empire taught you that different species were incompatible because keeping you separated maintained their power. But the truth is that all consciousness shares the same fundamental nature. Around Admiral Korath, Marcus could see other Imperial officers reacting to the transmission. The connection protocol had reached beyond the Admiral to touch every mind linked to the communication network. An entire Imperial fleet was experiencing unified consciousness for the first time in their lives. Admiral, said a voice from off-screen, presumably one of Korath's subordinates. The crew reports are unusual. Many are requesting clarification about our mission parameters. Korath was quiet for a long moment, his eyes showing the kind of deep thought that comes from having one's entire worldview challenged. When he spoke again, his voice carried none of its earlier authority. The Empire told us that cooperation between species was impossible. he said slowly, that only through dominance could order be maintained. But what I just experienced shows that the Empire was wrong, Astra finished. Admiral, I'm not asking you to betray your oath or abandon your duty. I'm asking you to consider what duty really means when your understanding of reality changes. What are you proposing? Join us, Astra said simply. Bring your fleet into the coalition. Help us build something better than the Empire ever imagined possible. Marcus held his breath as Admiral Korath considered the offer. Around them, the command deck was silent, except for the soft hum of the station's systems. Everything they had worked for, the integrated civilization, the cooperative technologies, the proof that different species could work together, hung in the balance of one man's decision. Finally, Korath spoke. My fleet and I will need time to process what we've experienced, he said slowly.
To understand what it means for our sworn duties and our personal convictions.
Of course, Astra replied. But, Admiral, while you're considering your options, might I suggest you experience more of what the Coalition has to offer?
Send delegations to our worlds. See how different species work together when they're not forced into competition. Judge for yourself whether what we've built is worth preserving. Over the following weeks, Marcus watched in amazement as the Imperial Fifth Fleet gradually integrated into Coalition space. It wasn't immediate. Decades of conditioning couldn't be overcome in a single moment of expanded consciousness. But the connection protocol had planted seeds of doubt about Imperial propaganda, and exposure to Coalition civilization allowed those seeds to grow. Admiral Korath himself spent days in the synthesis chamber, working with Astra and her sisters to understand the implications of universal consciousness. His rigid military bearing gradually gave way to something more flexible, more open to possibilities he'd never considered. The Empire's entire structure is based on the premise that order must be imposed from above, he told Marcus during one of their conversations. But what if order can emerge naturally from cooperation? What if the chaos we've been fighting to prevent is actually the birth of something better? It was a question that went to the heart of everything the Coalition represented. For millennia, galactic civilization had been organized around the principle of dominance, stronger species ruling weaker ones, advanced technologies giving advantage to their creators, individual nations or empires carving out territories through force. But the Coalition had proven that a different kind of organization was possible, one based on voluntary cooperation, shared benefits, and the recognition that diversity made everyone stronger rather than weaker. The transformation of Admiral Korath's fleet became a turning point in the war against the Empire. Word spread quickly through Imperial ranks that entire fleets were defecting to the Coalition, that officers who had served the Empire for decades were discovering alternatives to the rigid hierarchy they'd known all their lives. More importantly, the connection protocol was spreading. Every defecting Imperial officer carried the experience back to their homeworlds, sharing it with family and friends who had never imagined that consciousness could extend beyond the boundaries of their own species. It's happening faster than we predicted, Symphony reported during one of their regular strategic meetings. 47 Imperial worlds have declared independence in the past month. The Emperor has recalled most of his fleets to defend the core worlds. Marcus nodded, but he could see the concern in Astra's expression. What's wrong? He asked. The Emperor isn't retreating, Astra said quietly. He's consolidating power for something massive. My sisters and I can see the patterns forming. He's preparing for a final confrontation that will either restore Imperial dominance permanently or destroy everything. What kind of confrontation? Unknown, Symphony admitted. But our analysis suggests it will involve technologies that have never been deployed before. Possibly weapons that can target consciousness directly, or devices that can disrupt the universal patterns we've learned to perceive. The thought sent a chill through Marcus. The Coalition's strength came from their ability to see and work with the connections between all things. If the Empire found a way to disrupt those connections, then we'll have to make sure they don't succeed, Marcus said firmly. Whatever the Emperor is planning, we'll face it together. All of us. Astra smiled at him, the expression that had lit up his world since the first day he'd seen it. Together, she agreed, the way families always do. 6 months later, Marcus stood once again on New Haven's observation deck, but this time he wasn't alone. Astra was beside him, as always, but so was Symphony and her sisters, Admiral Korath and his senior staff, Elder Crystal Song and the Zephyrian Council, Captain Reynolds and her crew, and representatives from over 100 different species. Before them stretched the Coalition fleet. Not hundreds of ships, but thousands. Every species that had experienced the connection protocol had chosen to join the Alliance, bringing their unique technologies and perspectives to the growing network of cooperation. The Emperor's final offensive begins tomorrow, Admiral Korath reported. Intelligence suggests he plans to use some kind of consciousness disruption weapon against our core worlds. And our response? Marcus asked. Astra turned to him with that same radiant smile he'd fallen in love with. We're going to show the galaxy what synthesis really means. Not just cooperation between species, but the evolution of consciousness itself into something the universe has been waiting for. She gestured toward the fleet surrounding them, where ships from countless worlds worked together with perfect coordination. But more than that, Marcus could see the deeper pattern she was indicating. The web of connection that linked every being in the coalition, creating a network of consciousness that spans star systems. The Emperor thinks consciousness can be disrupted, Astra continued. But consciousness isn't something you can attack. It's something you can only join. And tomorrow, we're going to give him and every being in the core worlds the same choice we've given everyone else. The choice to see reality as it truly is. Marcus looked out at the stars and thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with a distress beacon and a dying alien child. It had grown through acts of compassion, choices made for love instead of logic, and the gradual recognition that the universe was far more beautiful and interconnected than anyone had imagined. Now it would end, or begin anew, with the greatest test of cooperation in galactic history. Think it'll work? Marcus asked, echoing the question he'd posed so many times before. Astra took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the practiced ease of 2 years of partnership. Around them, beings from across the galaxy worked together toward a common goal, proving every day that the impossible was simply another word for the untried. Marcus, she said, her voice carrying all the love and confidence he'd learned to trust completely. Look around you. Look at what we've built, what we've become. The Empire's greatest weapon was convincing everyone that they were alone. But we've shown them they were never alone at all. She squeezed his hand gently, her touch warm with the promise of whatever came next. It's already working, she said with absolute certainty. We just need to help the rest of the galaxy see it too. As the Coalition fleet prepared for its final mission, Marcus realized that regardless of what happened tomorrow, they had already won the only victory that truly mattered. They had proven that love was stronger than fear, that cooperation was more powerful than conquest, and that the choice to care for others could literally transform the universe. Everything else was just the consequences of that choice. And Marcus had learned to trust in consequences born from love.